Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Turnup. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I know we haven't done an episode in 8, 9 days, and I feel that more things have happened in the Trump's presidency in almost a month than that has happened in Biden's 4 years. It's been crazy and honestly too hard to keep up with. And so CK and I sat down for a moment and we kind of decided, hey, we really want to focus on Doge and tariffs. And as you know, we're bringing CK back by because of popular demand. CK, I'll turn it over to you, bud.
Yeah, it's good to be back, MR. We closed last week's podcast and talked about our concern with Doge's efficacy. Vivek had just stepped down to run for governor. Elon was tweeting 47 times a day and running 5 companies. And I think we both shared a sentiment that Doge may not have any meaningful impact moving forward. Well, cue the Jordan meme. Elon took that personally. We're 3 weeks into Trump's last dance, and just like the other former number 45, Trump is laser focused and back with a vengeance, and Elon Pippin is putting up 47 a night. This metaphor is getting a little messy, so I'm going to hand it back to you to get us back on track.
Oh my gosh, I am dying right now. But CK, you're right. We were joking about Doge, and it's like all these crazy things are happening, and the one thing we didn't see on the news was Doge. And so I think this is a great opportunity to talk about Doge and really specifically USAID because that's what's most popular right now, and I definitely want to hear your thoughts on it. But just for the audience that's not super aware what's going on, USAID is a $40 billion program that is basically, being described as the most fraudulent thing in the United States government. And so, just a little quick history, CK, before I turn it over to you to get your thoughts on it. And so, just to let everyone know, USAID was actually created under the Kennedy administration during the height of the Cold War. When we had our struggle with the Soviet Union, Kennedy wanted a more efficient way to counter Soviet influence abroad through foreign assistance and saw the State Department as frustrating bureaucrats doing their thing. So he's like, hey, if I can create this, I can, win goodwill throughout the world. And so, as you know, the Soviet Union no longer exists. It collapsed in 1991, and yet this program still exists. So for the reason this program was created for, the intended purpose no longer exists, and now it's more like, hey, well, we're competing against China's Belt Road Initiative, and Russia's still a player, even though it's no longer the Soviet Union. So we still need this program. And as I said a moment ago, this is a $40 billion program. And Elon Musk has essentially said, hey, by the way, this isn't a worm in an apple. The entire apple is just worms. This is the worst, most corrupt thing ever. And so, as always, turnups, I want to take a step back and I want to kind of take from look at this from a non-biased perspective, even though it's kind of hard right now with the information coming out. So, CK, I want to ask you, with these accusations coming out saying, hey, this is absolute government fraud, waste, and abuse, like this is probably money laundering to some extent. What is going on with this program? And as Elon digs deeper, what do you think we're going to continue to find uh, through these government programs that aren't serving the purpose in which they were intended to serve?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you hit it on the head with that introduction of it. It was meant to project soft power, nation build, strengthen allies and partners. And it still, probably in a perfect world, has a purpose to compete with China's Belt and Road Initiative, right? We can't just project our power through military. If the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So you need some diplomacy, you need some economic, you need some infrastructure. It's good to have those tools in your belt. However, it clearly has gotten out of hand. So I have looked a few examples of waste. 1.5 million to advance diversity and equity inclusion in Serbia's workplaces. 70,000 for a production of a DEI musical in Ireland. 2.5 million for electric vehicles in Vietnam. $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. 2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala. I mean, the list goes on and on. I just mentioned a third of them because we don't have that much time.
So how can you look at the American taxpayer and be like, hey, by the way, we want to create a musical in Ireland and we're going to increase your taxes on the federal level to help pay for these programs? Like that's what I'm not really following. And I know there's counter arguments out there, but what is the counter argument to the abuse of this program, helping things across the world. I don't even know if they're actually helping. But do we have like facts that all these people that are supposedly getting this money is making a difference, or could it possibly be money laundering, which is kind of out there in the ether right now, being, hey, maybe it's happening, maybe it's not.
Well, the biggest argument is that 32,000 in a huge $6 trillion federal budget is a drop in the bucket. But that's what the budget is right now. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And it's a
Yeah.
million here, 30,000 here, and it adds up. And Doge's job is to get rid of a lot of those cuts, and I think they're doing a good job at it. But to your point, maybe it's not just waste. It could also be fraud and abuse. So they've also found that Politico News was given 8 million taxpayer money from USAID, including 500,000 for 37 subscriptions to the website. And so
Jeez.
when you scratch your head at that and you say, what is going on here? If the government is funding a media entity and that media entity has a heavy bias toward the party that is funding them, which is the Democratic Party, it screams 1984 Ministry of Truth, a propaganda machine.
Wow. If you haven't read the book, highly recommend it. Fantastic book. And yeah, so I think that brings in a lot of concern too, is because when you hop on X or Facebook, or even when you're reading just articles on different websites, you'll see what these senators are saying. And I haven't seen a single Democratic senator come out and say, oh, hey, no, this is a problem. It's all questioning, hey, Elon Musk doesn't have the authority to do this. But CK, correct me if I'm wrong. Elon isn't doing this. Literally, he is doing the research, he's doing the investigation, and then providing his recommendation to Trump and Trump staff, and they're the ones actually taking action. Because, right, Elon's not a part of the staff. He doesn't actually have that type of power.
Yeah, and I guess the courts will decide. But like you said, they're not actually attacking the waste. They're deflecting to, oh, this is illegal to get at the information this way. So what Elon did, he had 20 software engineers. They walked into the USAID building. The funny thing is they were between like 19 and 25 years old. One of them was an intern at SpaceX. Just like these really young kids walking in. They got clearances from the superiors like Rubio. A lot of people pushed their and fast tracked their security clearances so they can access all this information. They're
Yep.
calling these kids the Muscovites.
Oh,
And
I haven't heard that one yet.
they walked in, pretty much just grabbed the computers, plugged in their laptops, and started looking for information. The claim is they only have read-only access. I guess if you're going to fight it from a legal standpoint, it would be theirs. Like these guys accessing government information, and how did they do it? Did they do it in a legal form? Did they truly plug in personal laptops? How did they acquire this information? Was it legal? Because you're right, Musk isn't making the decisions what to cut. He is pretty much, because he's not a cabinet member. The Senate did not give him approval, and he's not an official position. But you can just call him a special advisor to the president, which he can have as many of those as he wants. And so Trump is
Yeah.
making the decision for the administration. So if you're going to fight it on legal ground, it's how did they access the information? Was that done through legal means?
Okay, interesting, interesting. And I also think this is one of like the rare exceptions in our life, and probably our parents' life too, where a politician is actually following through on everything that he said he was going to follow through on, which I think is crazy in that right. And so I want to ask this question next is, so right now estimate that Doge is cutting about $56 billion. Then the goal is 2 trillion. So to your point, there's a long, long ways to go. Do you think that Elon, Doge as a whole, is going to be able to continue the momentum, the fast start of Trump's presidency, and continue to cut away at fraud, waste, and abuse? Because every American knows, right? Let me take a step back. It's kind of funny. Every American knows that there's a problem to some extent, that there's a problem with our taxes, with what we're funding, with the programs, and all the BS. And you get everyone riled up and say, yeah, hey, there needs to be change. We need to do something different. But when the axe starts swinging, that's when people start getting really, really scared. And it's like, hey, you said there was a problem. I agreed that there's a problem. I'm building a solution. Oh, by the way, these are very, very legitimate things that are not necessary, that are not helping the American people. Why are we scared in this moment? Should we not be encouraged? And CK, if there's already this much fear already, or this much opposition already, how much further do you think Doge can actually go?
Well, I don't think like Trump's base opposes it at all. And if Trump
True.
has Congress, if he has the Senate, if he has the Supreme Court, uh, then he has pretty much free will if this is his priority. If it remains a priority, it would be so easy to cut 2 trillion. I would liken it to, I mean, a 500-pound man cutting the first 100 pounds. It the first 100 are the easiest, right? Because it's just all you gotta do is start walking. It's so much
Or
excess fat right now.
or would you say it's the hardest because you've been so overweight for so long? Changing your habits and lifestyle is the hardest. So we can see the initial 100 billion come off, and then everything afterwards is like, oh, this is right. This is normal. This is what's supposed to happen. There's the
I
counter.
Yeah, well, the hardest in that you need that initial push. But once you start making those lifestyle changes, that 100 part, and that's what Trump is. He's the lifestyle change to our government.
I don't think it could be said better that way. Okay, before we transition to tariffs, because I think we have all heard tariffs a million times between Mexico and Canada. Is there anything else you want to add to Doge or the USAID?
Yeah, I think USAID is the first domino in a long block. We've also seen some news on Department of Education. Uh, he was infamously in the news for giving the job of head of the Department of Education to what is it, Linda McMahon, Vince
Yes.
McMahon's
Yep.
wife.
Yep. Exactly.
And pretty much he this week he came out and said I instructed her that her job is to be out of a job, to terminate her department and her own position. He wants the Department of Education to be gone. Um,
So
you know,
so
and
so so isn't the Department of Education like important? Isn't it needed? Isn't it like good for standardization of tests across like the country? Coming out of high school, like the SATs or ACTs, and you're trying to get into college. What what function is the Department of Education failing to provide? Which is why we want to eliminate it and save some more money. Because at what point are we cutting off muscle instead of fat?
Yeah, depends on who you ask. Department of Education was big for civil rights enforcement. Uh, Title One, school library programs, special programs. Also does federal loans for college, guaranteed. Now, if you ask conservatives, we're spending 80 billion in the Department of Education. It was established in 1980, and after that establishment, test scores have generally shown stagnation or slight declines. So we establish a department, we pay 80 billion annually for it, and we've seen no actual change in test scores. Not only that, if you look at the federal loan, there was a recent study by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York that said for every dollar of subsidized student loans offered by the federal government, the market would respond by elevating tuition by 60 cents. So many attribute the rise in tuition of college with subsidized federal student loans, which was established by the Department of Education. And if you look at a graph of tuition, college tuition, it skyrockets after 1980. Right after they establish it, it goes way up.
So that's a good argument for getting rid of it. Now, what's the argument for keeping it?
I think the argument is that
Is it just that hey, this is the Department of Education? It sounds important. It to some extent is important. And when you're saying you're trying to cut education, you just come off as a villain, just from an optics standpoint.
maybe you could say oversight, standardization. You could say help with like if the goal of education is the weakest link to help the last person catch up in the race. Maybe the Department of Education will bring some of that, but I think a lot of it is at the expense of everyone in the middle and the front of the pack as well. And not to mention, all of the states have their own education, so it is truly a redundancy.
Interesting, interesting. No, I think those are some really good points. I honestly haven't talked or thought too much about it because I think it's recently come up. I know Trump's mentioned it before, but now it's catching some steam, and I think people are actually taking it serious now, unlike his last administration. Because if he came after USAID, I think everyone feels that anything's on the chopping block, anything's available. All right, I want to
Yep.
transition over to tariffs. And we've seen a lot about tariffs, and Trump's favorite word is tariffs. You can literally probably just Google Trump tariffs, and you're going to see a bunch of memes or him just saying it 1,000 times with like EDM music blasting in the background. And if that doesn't exist, I'm sure it's about to. It's his favorite thing, his favorite negotiation. Now, there's a lot of economists in the world that's saying, hey, tariffs aren't good. They actually hurt both parties. It's really going to hurt the consumers. So if Americans tariff other countries, they're just going to pay more. They're going to make up the cost and difference. And sure, not going to argue with economists, and I'm sure can be like, hey, no, the businesses are going to eat it, or the country's going to eat it, or people just aren't going to buy that product because it's now inflated more than they're willing to spend, right? So depending how you look at it, you can figure out where you stand on it. But at the end of the day, when the United States of America says, hey, we're going to send a 25% tariff on your country, that country takes notice, and they do because they know it is going to hurt them. Sure, it may hurt the American consumer, but it's also going to severely hurt their economy as well. And I think Trump is in a position of power. He understands that. He knows that. And so when he's threatening a tariff against the country, they're going to listen and they're more likely to comply with what he wants to do. And so when I see him threatening tariffs with Canada, with Mexico, I don't take it really as face value. And CK, I may be wrong there, but every time he backs away from the tariff, he gets something in return. And I honestly think he's just utilizing the media really, really well. You don't see a lot of presidents being so open and honest with the media or so blunt. They're more reserved, they're more polished, they're more talking points or just perfect. He'll go to the media and be like, yeah, hell yeah, I'm going to send a 25% tariff on Canada. And everyone's like, whoa, why Canada? What did they do to deserve that? They're not our enemy. We're not scared of them. We're supposed to be best friends with them. And in reality, it's like, nope, I want X amount of billions of dollars to help stopping fentanyl. I want X, Y, and Z from Canada. And if they don't, I'll tariff them. And if they call my bluff, then they're going to suffer because I am not afraid to follow through. And so I really think he's usually using the media to like really make this like the biggest center of attention in the world. And then he's like, oh, I'm just getting what I want. I didn't actually want to tariff Canada to begin with. I just wanted them to do this other thing. And this is the avenue that I took. So, CK, I'm sorry. That was a long spiel. What do you make of this tariff situation? Do you follow the same line of thinking I am, or am I way off in Looney Town?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. You go to the negotiating table from a position of strength. And Trump knows that the U.S. is at a position of strength with virtually every other nation on earth.
Mm,
Yes, we do need strong alliances and we should look out for the interests of our partners, but America should come first for Americans. Other
yep.
leaders of other countries can prioritize their people's interests. It's not a good partnership if one country is getting fleeced by the other. It's not good if it's one sided. That breeds dissent and fractured alliances. We've seen
Mm-hmm.
that in history. So everyone should look out for their own interest, and like minds and like ideas will create natural alliances.
So I want to touch on something you just said. So I just went off on this rant about how Trump uses tariffs to get other things that he wants other than tariffing the country. And you're saying, yes, that works because the United States is more powerful. But, and this is a big but, it could be potentially a long-term negative because that country knows they're being played. They know they don't have a choice. They know they have to comply to something, hey, they probably don't want, but they know the tariffs is worse. So what is that doing to our allies overall? Do you think they're just going to get tired after a while? Are they already tired? Are they going to find a new way to fight back or bounce back because they don't want to keep getting put in this corner where they have no choice but to comply? Yes, tariffs are effective in the short term, but is this going to hurt us in the long term?
We have so many chips. It, I mean, if you throw away all of the border stuff, all of the trade stuff, just look at defense. We are the number one deterrent to Russia and China in Europe and Asia. We're the reason Canada and Mexico is pretty much safe, except for within their own borders. E-
Oh, jeez.
Everyone relies on us for national defense because we pay more than the next 23 countries combined. So everyone has their own national health care and a lot of free social things because their defense spending is like 2% of their GDP. And that's because they know if push came to shove and they got into it with someone, we would be there. that's the final chip that like if people start ramping up their defense so they're independent of us, then maybe we have less power at the negotiating table. But once that happens, then great, we'll spend less and we can hang out in our continent, uh, away from everyone. So I don't think it's going to happen.
Okay, so that is the ultimate trump card is our military, which may be our biggest currency. There's I don't want to get too off track right now, but with China and Russia trying to build BRICS, and you have the euro, and you have all these different currencies, but the dollar is still the universal currency. It's really
Yeah,
because of our military more so than our Fortune 500 businesses.
I think so. Now, you did mention China just now. That's the one tariff that hasn't gone away yet because he threatened with Canada, Mexico, and China, and he rescinded on Canada and Mexico after negotiations. Did not rescind on China yet. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, China's the toughest one. China's pretty much United States' only near peer. I don't know if we want to use the word threat if we want to be hostile like that, but competition, I think, is a fair word to use. We blow Canada, Mexico, every single European country out of the water from an economic standpoint, from a military standpoint. You name it, we're pretty much better, and unless that country specializes in one certain thing. China is a different ball player. And so I think if we want to fight fire with China, we have to be prepared to get burnt. Now, it may be worth it. We may be able to hit them harder than it hits us, or we may be able to leverage a tariff to help our industry or help an allied industry. I can definitely see that happening. But they are one country that we cannot blindly threaten with a tariff and get what we want. We have to be able to negotiate hard, and we have to be, or I'm assuming, incredibly strategic in how we're going to leverage our tariffs or other threats to get what we want.
Yeah, I think to counter that, any movement to independence from China in trade is good. We saw with Russia and Ukraine when that kicked off, Germany and other nations in Europe, their dependence on Russian energy was awful for their economies.
Yep.
And we cannot rely on China for anything because they can turn it off anytime there's conflict between us, and we would get burned. So I think we should be making moves to independence from them and less trade with them anyways because they're looking to surpass us by 2049, and we should be looking to be independent from them. Now, free trade is good. You can say all of that, but I
Yeah,
don't see the.
but to counter that, wouldn't you say that Canada or Europe should have the same mindset with the United States? If we're threatening Canada with 25% tariffs anytime we want anything, shouldn't Canada be like, oh shoot, we got to find a different trade partner? We got to work with China, or we got to work with a European country or Russia or whatever because the United States is threatening us too much. Can't that same thought process hurt us in what we're doing with the current people we trade with?
Maybe. I mean, that's a good point, but I think China has directly said they want to take us out of the game by 2049. Now, I mean, you could say that Trump has also said that about Canada as a 51st state.
Yeah.
So maybe Canada can take that view, but I wouldn't call us adversaries, and I wouldn't call us threats. Us in Canada, obviously, no one would say that.
Yeah. I think there's any
China,
legit fear there.
everyone would call them our adversary.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point, and I guess Canada's probably thinks, once Trump's not president, we don't have to worry about this ever again because no one else has shown this type of behavior. But no, you're right about China, and I think about it, I was like, hey, what is the United States' next move to break away from China? And it's honestly, it's really hard. I mean, trying to develop the rest of Southeast Asia, whether it's Vietnam, whether it's India, whether it's the Philippines or whatever, but China is such a dominator in the manufacturing field, from anywhere from Nike shoes to Apple phones. And so I agree with what you're saying, or it makes a lot of sense. But I think it's just going to be really, really hard to find someone else. And I know other countries are working on filling the gap. I just think it's going to be more of a long term solution than something shorthand that we can pull off if needed.
Yeah, and our government's not good at long-term solutions when election cycles are every 4 years.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, CK, before we wrap this up, do you have any closing thoughts or anything else you want to add?
Just one tidbit: Senator Mike Lee asked new Attorney General Pam Bondi to release the Jeffrey Epstein client list. Trending
Wow.
on X right now.
Wow.
Hopefully we get a splash. I'm not gonna hold my breath, but
I'm not either. There's some names on there that they're just not going to release that under any circumstance. There's no way. That's crazy, but I don't believe it. But all right, let's wrap this one up. Thank you, Turnups, for listening. I really appreciate it. You know, we trying to have these conversations. We try to stay non-biased, and I think sometimes we get carried away with the news, what it's saying, or we're trying to digest it. Does it make sense? Does it? Does it not? And so, depending on what side of the fence you are, you're probably like, you're no longer a senator. You're this way or that way. Well, we're just trying to read into the news. We're trying to make sense of it. And it's really hard, honestly. There's so many things happening every single day. Every time I open my phone, there's a new thing happening. And it's like, oh my gosh, how do we make sense of this? And you know what? That may be part of the point. So many things are happening. People are missing things, and that's how things are getting done. And maybe a little past Congress, maybe a little past the Senate. But regardless, thank you all for listening to another episode of the Daily Turnup. Please like, subscribe, tell everyone you know to listen. It would mean the world to us.